The floor was already burning behind him when Walter Briggs stopped running and turned back toward the fire. Smoke rolled down the corridor in thick gray waves, and somewhere past the flames, someone was screaming a name over and over. Walter's mop bucket sat forgotten by the wall, its yellow plastic already warping from the heat. He gripped the wooden handle in his blistered hand, not as a weapon, not as a tool, but as the only thing steady enough to hold on to while his mind raced back 40 years to a jungle he swore he'd never think about again. The sprinklers had failed. The alarm kept shrieking, and the people running past him, lawyers, executives, secretaries in silk blouses, none of them looked at the old janitor pressed against the wall. They never did. For 11 years, Walter Briggs had emptied their trash cans, wiped their coffee rings, and existed in the corners of their vision like a piece of furniture nobody thought to thank. That was about to change. Because on the 14th floor, trapped behind a jammed fire door, was Diane Castellano, the building's CEO, the woman who once complained that the recycling wasn't sorted properly and never learned Walter's name. And Walter was the only person left who knew that door had been broken for 6 months, and the only person who knew the maintenance shortcut through the old service stairwell that the blueprints didn't even show anymore. If you believe there's still courage hiding in the people the world overlooks, hit that like button right now, because what Walter did next, he did without anyone asking him to. He pressed the damp towel over his mouth and walked straight into the smoke. Nobody had asked Walter about his life, not really, not in years. If they had, they might have learned that before he pushed a mop for a living. He pulled wounded men out of burning transport trucks in a war most people his age preferred to forget. They might have learned why his hands shook slightly every August, or why he flinched at the sound of alarms. They might have learned that the reason he took this job, this quiet, invisible job, was because after what he'd seen, invisibility felt like the safest place in the world. But nobody had asked, so nobody knew. The stairwell was choking with smoke, but Walter kept moving, counting doors from memory, his palm dragging along the wall to keep his bearings the way he'd been trained decades ago. Behind a door marked storage, he found it, the narrow service passage that connected to the 14th floor without passing through the flames. He didn't know if it would still be clear. He didn't know if Diane Castellano was even alive. He went anyway. When he found her, she was curled against the jammed door, coughing so hard she could barely speak. Mascara streaked down her face. The woman who ran a 9-figure company reduced to something small and terrified on a smoke-filled floor. "Walter," she rasped, squinting through the haze, and something in her voice cracked, because for the first time, she actually remembered his name. "Building's got a bad heart," he said, hauling her up by the arm, "but it's got good bones. Come on." She didn't ask how he knew a way out that the firefighters 2 floors below didn't. There wasn't time. What she didn't know, what nobody in that building knew, was that 6 years earlier, Walter had quietly reported the broken fire door to management. Twice. Both times, the memo had been filed away and forgotten, buried under budget meetings and quarterly projections. Walter never brought it up again. He simply started memorizing every hallway, every stairwell, every crawl space in the building, the way old habits from war never really let go of a man. He told himself it was nothing, just caution, just a janitor doing a job nobody paid him to do. He never imagined it would matter like this. The service passage was narrow, hot, barely passable, but Walter led her through it step by step, talking the whole way. Not because he had much to say, but because he remembered that panic feeds on silence, and silence was something he understood better than anyone. Almost there, he told her, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. "Here's the thing about the biggest moment in this story. It hasn't happened yet. Stay with me." They broke through a side exit into the parking garage just as a support beam collapsed somewhere above them with a sound like thunder. Diane collapsed against a concrete pillar, gasping, alive, staring at Walter like she was seeing him. Really seeing him, for the very first time in 11 years. "Why didn't anyone know you could do that?" she asked between coughs. Walter looked down at his ruined hands, the same hands that once carried a wounded corporal 3 miles through elephant grass. The same hands that had spent a decade wiping down desks nobody thanked him for. Nobody asked, he said simply. It would have ended there. A quiet act of heroism, unnoticed by history, if not for something Diane did 3 weeks later. Once the building had reopened and the smoke damage had been cleared away, she found Walter's old service reports, buried in a forgotten filing cabinet, dated years before the fire. The warnings he'd written, the ones ignored. She stood in front of the entire company and told them the truth, that the man who saved her life had tried to save the whole building years earlier, and no one had listened. Walter didn't want a reward. He didn't want his photo on the company newsletter. But Diane gave him something he never expected. She funded a scholarship in his name for the children of maintenance workers, the invisible people who keep buildings standing and never get a mention. Walter still mops the floors sometimes, though these days people actually stop to talk to him. They ask about his life. They finally listen. And every August, when the anniversary of that fire comes around, someone leaves a cup of coffee on his cart with a small note that just says, "Thank you for seeing what the rest of us missed." If this story moved you, if you still believe kindness and courage live in the people we walk past every single day, subscribe for more stories like Walter's. Because somewhere out there, someone invisible is waiting for a moment to be seen too.